Welcome to Disc and Dice, episode 40. My name is Jared. I'm joined by my co-hosts Timmy and Paul as always. How are you guys going this evening?
I'm all right. Thank you for asking.
I'm also doing well.
Now, Timmy,
Yes.
to get straight into it, you reached a bit of a milestone in your life recently. I like that I'm saying this, and you're probably like, what is he even talking about?
Yeah, I'm like
you
the
get-
Key and Peele sketch with just like all this sweat running down my forehead right now. Like, is this a
No,
setup? What have I done?
you saw snow for the first time in your life.
Oh yeah.
Oh, really?
It snowed over here in Victoria on Thursday or Wednesday or Thursday. Just like randomly, like obviously like we're locked down and I'm working from home and I was like had the laptop in the bedroom and the big window open and Shayla pipes up suddenly and goes, "Hey, look, it's snowing." And I hadn't even realized because like she's like right on it. And to me, it just still looked like rain because it was only just getting to that snow point. But yeah, I spent like the next 20 minutes just sat in front of the window and then we got the boys dressed and all went outside and let the snow settle on my hair and my arms and stuff. And she took a photo ostensibly of the kids, but I think I was the biggest kid of us all, like exclaiming that the ground was crunchy. so yeah, that was special for me.
I saw the video on social media of that, but I didn't realize that was the first time. That's really cool.
Yeah, like I just have never seen snow in real life before. So yeah,
Now you know it exists.
I have proof now. All of my doubts can be put to bed. I was trying. I got a message from your partner Paul, which was apparently a video of some Russian kids playing in the snow. I assume she sent me that in response to my video, but I couldn't see it because it was private. But the reason I bring it up is because I recall when you first experienced snow, or at least a Russian snow, and you sent that across to us, and she was in the background doing the classic "you call this snow" kind of thing. And I thought she must think my video is so ridiculous because you can barely see it on the ground. Like you can still see the grass. It just looks like a little bit of frost in my hair.
You're like, don't take this away from me.
That's it.
Yeah, I think it's like the snow that doesn't settle like that. At least, yeah, for me at first that was totally a novelty. And then you get to the point where it's like it's everywhere and it's really annoying, and then it's less of a novelty.
Yeah, look, I'm keen for it, you know. Like I've not yet been inconvenienced by it, so bring it on.
You don't like in the middle of winter, if it's somewhere like that, it's okay. The times when it sucks are at the beginning and at the end when it snows, but then you get the temperature increases, which mean it melts and turns to like sludge and mud, and that becomes really inconvenient. You know, it's fine when it's below zero the whole time and it never melts and it's just like white winter everywhere. Like that's all good. That's a bit of fun. But you know, when you're sort of like sloshing your way through a few centimeters of mud every time, then yeah, it's not so fun.
I'll never get over just how crazy the silence is when it's been snowing, like even just a few centimeters, but when everything's sort of covered with that, you know, small layer of snow or even large layer of snow, just it absorbs all the sound and it's like eerily tranquil. I'm not sure if you remember that, Paul, or if that was something that you got to experience, Timmy, but it's something that I always listen out for when I'm in the snow is, you know, I guess the absence of sound.
Totally.
But enough of this, what we've been doing in real life. Let's get back to shutting ourselves indoors and gluing ourselves to screens and have a bit of a chat about the games we've been playing, hey? That's what we're here to do, right?
I want to throw a total curveball because I know that like we don't have a whole lot to talk about this episode, and so we can afford to just go on for a bit. And we're talking about snow, and you're talking about games, and so I'm thinking about games set in winter. And I know you're a big fan of this, Timmy, and I'm a bit of a fan of it as well. What are the games that spring to mind when you think of good games set in wintry environments?
Are you talking games in general or specifically video games?
Or I guess video games. I don't know. Are you thinking like a board game or something?
Yeah, Dead of Winter comes straight to mind. Like
That's a good
the
one.
whole board is snow covered, and all of the snow plays such a big factor in a lot of the decisions you make.
We should get together sometime after this is, we can when we can, and I'd like to role play Dead of Winter and just crank the AC up, like as high as it goes. Maybe get like cover the board with a few things of ice. Have just maybe some dry ice on the ground so it's like misty. Really, really get into it. Rug up, play a game of Dead of Winter.
This is like it's the step up from
Freezing our
when
asses off.
it's the step up from when you have like the moody music on in the background. You're playing like some kind of fantasy game, so you put like Lord of the Rings on in the background. You're recreating the climate of the game.
Yes.
Yeah,
completely.
I've always wanted to do that with Avalon, JT. Like have like wooden flagons with like mulled wine and stuff.
I
And
thought
like
you were going to
have
take that somewhere else and be
have
like, I've always wanted to stab people, when we find out that they're the assassin.
yeah, but the assassin does the stabbing. The assassin never gets got, man.
Yeah, they get
I
to kill
thought they
someone
got-
every time.
I thought they get
Yeah.
got if you figure out who they are.
No,
That's what I assume.
Merlin.
Oh,
Yeah.
The
right.
assassin always gets like a like one killing blow at the end.
Ah, yes, that's right. Okay. Yep.
But yeah,
It's been so long.
to take it back to your question, Paul, video games set in winter, the two that spring to mind is The Walking Dead. I think it's the second season.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of snow towards the end of that. So I think of that. And also both Last of Us games. There's extended periods of snow in both of those.
That's true. Walking Dead does that second season, when it does the snowy bits, it does a really good job for a game that's like pretty firmly on rails of having you kind of like stuck in a blizzard and not sure where to go, which is a bit of an achievement when there's not a lot of freedom in those games. I remember sort of towards the end, there's a sequence where you've got to like find other people in the snow and you don't really know whether you're going the right way, and it really kind of nails that feeling of like zero visibility.
Absolutely. Was either of those the games that it seemed like you were trying to lead me to a game, or was it that genuinely an open-ended question when you asked it?
It was genuinely open. Like off the top of my head, I thought you might say Red Dead 2 because I know I've played a little bit of the start of that, and I know that it begins with a real wintry sequence. So I thought that might have been where you went. The one that springs to mind for me, to be honest, is probably Skyrim. Because
of course.
It's sort of, that was, each sort of Elder Scrolls game has its own kind of map, but they all kind of have a different vibe to it. And the Skyrim world really had that sort of, it's almost like a Viking Norse mythology kind of thing going on. A lot of snow and a lot of mountains. And I played those games with a whole bunch of mods installed, which added in systems for like hypothermia and temperature and things like that. So I had to be conscious of how many layers of clothes I was wearing. And it was always really fun when I'd have like a quest up in the mountains. I'd have to go and like get my bear fur kind of cloak out of my chest and take that with me, because I knew that that's the only way I could make it there. And I always like that kind of stuff when you get like the environment influencing the way you play.
I'd love to say Project Zomboid, but we have not reached that point yet, Paul. So
yeah, I would love to say that as well, but we always die before we get there.
yeah.
Yeah, thinking a little bit more broadly, Zelda Breath of the Wild has some really good snowy areas, but unlike some of what we've been talking about, it's less like this part of the game is the snow place. It's just like, because it's an open world, there's a couple of areas that are just like, the cold is going to start being a factor here.
One that comes to my mind, and I think Paul may know which one this is. There was a game called Cryostasis, Sleep of Reason, which was made by a Russian developer. But a big mechanic of that game, it was like a survival horror game, was moving from part to part on this derelict icebreaker in the middle of nowhere. You have to find like areas of warmth or sources of heat to be able to move around. And that was actually one of the games that I've played that has snow and ice everywhere. that really actually made me feel kind of cold, even when I was playing in like room temperature. Um, yeah, that was a great one for me.
I haven't played that one, but I remember you talking about it a number of times. I think we, at some point, tried to look into whether you can get it. And I think it's one of those games that with the sort of switch to digital distribution, it got left behind. It's like it's not on
I think it
Steam, it's
did.
not on GOG. So you've kind of got to, it's one of those ones you have to download like an ISO file and, mount it as a virtual DVD drive to be able to play it now, which is a real bummer because you're not the only person I've heard who said that it's kind of a cool story in that game.
Yeah, and at this stage, I'm not even sure if it's worth going back to, just because it's so old now. It may not hold up as well as what I think it did back when I played it. But that experience is one that I remember in terms of cold environments.
There's also the second installment in the current Tomb Raider series, the Rise of the Tomb Raider, I think.
Oh
Yeah, that
yeah.
one's set in Russia or Siberia. But yeah, that one's snowy for a massive portion of the map, and you've got like your ice picks and ice caves and all sorts of stuff. So that one really leans into the wintry environments for sure.
Actually,
I
similar to that as
either of you
well, the
guys.
Uncharted 2 as well
Yeah,
Yeah.
had
I'm
a
just like
bunch of
looking at the games
stuff.
here. And I was looking at Uncharted and I was like, I'm sure there's snowy stuff in one of those, but I can't remember which one it is. Like I love all those games equally and like they're just such one big story in my mind now.
There's definitely like there's parts in all those games I feel like where you go up in mountains and there's snow and ice. It's there's always a bit like that. It's always cool.
Yeah, I separate those games out by like what was the surprise supernatural creature in like am I fighting like bat demon vampire men? All right, well this is number 1. Am I fighting like ancient savage gorilla men? All right, that's number 2. Like
Yeah. Well, it's number 3 is like it's like Middle Eastern teleporting ghosts or something like that.
yeah. And then number 4 pleasantly didn't really have one. So good.
Yeah, that is nice. Hey, I got
Hmm.
one more just before we move
Yeah.
on from this because we are the Disc and Dice podcast, and it would be a shame if we disappointed people. And I've got to say that the first Witcher game has a really cool snow and ice sequence as like the very very end finale to the game, which like even though that's an old game, I don't want to spoil why it's in there, but that has a really cool sequence, and the fact that it's snowy and icy kind of is important there. So, there's our Witcher reference for this episode.
Thank
Aren't the
goodness.
Skellige Isles also snowy?
Yeah, they
I
also
can't really quite remember.
they do have like that kind of environment too. They have a bit of snow, but I guess that the end of Witcher 1 just sticks with me. Like I know you've played it, JT, because it's kind of like it comes a bit out of nowhere and it's a really cool ending to the game.
Skellige
I only
always felt to me more like kind of like the Scottish Highlands, like very craggly, very grey and
like tundra
and
almost.
yeah, like I don't remember them being so snowy. Like maybe snowy in a few places, but it was more like rainy and foggy and sleet everywhere.
I think you get like snow-capped mountains in the distance and things like that.
Yeah, I feel like there was more snow towards like Cairmorn and stuff at certain points, but
Mm.
yeah. Oh well, I guess I have to replay it so I can find out for sure.
then we
You
then we
twisted
can
my arm.
then we can talk about that for a whole episode.
Well, look, at the risk of segueing again before everybody's ready to do it, should we have a chat about what we've been playing now?
I think we should.
All right. Well, we've already set it up that we haven't been playing heaps and heaps this episode between the three of us. But JT, I think you've been playing something that in title sounds potentially like a not very interesting game, but I'm intrigued to hear about it.
Yeah, well, as you both know, I'm big on my Sims, and that's not the game The Sims. I mean simulators. And I've recently picked up one that was actually in my Steam wish list, and I got a little notification saying that it's cheap as heck. So no, I'm not going to turn down a bargain. So snapped up Car Simulator. I think it's actually called. Oh no, sorry, not Car Simulator. Car Mechanic Simulator. I think the full title is Car Mechanic Simulator 2018, but I think they've sort of omitted the 2018 because they're just ongoingly updating it as if it's, a new game every year. But
Has there been like a 2017 and a 2016? Like, I feel like,
I
is
don't
it
think there was. I think it just came out as 2018 because I was
they were
actually,
just really ambitious? They're like, this is
yeah,
going to
there
be a
was,
hit.
It's
yeah,
I
it's gonna
kind
be.
of like that there's almost a broad genre of mundane simulation games that come out every year. There's like
It's so weird.
farm simulator, train simulator, there's
Yeah,
the truck driving
construction
ones.
simulator.
Yeah, and
Um,
they all do tend to get those kind of annual releases, which is I find is kind of bizarre, but there's something kind of interesting about the fact that there's an audience for all of these.
that's right, and I think like it's a weird niche of games, and I don't just mean just because of the car mechanic simulator. I just mean simulators, or I guess what can you call them? Like occupation simulators in general. But this one's an interesting sort of beast. I wouldn't say it's a game that I would normally pay, top dollar for, having played it, but it's one of those therapeutic experiences, and I've actually learnt a fair bit by playing it because it's modeling basically every part of a car. Uh, take or save for things like various pipes and electrical connections and things like that, because that's obviously, a lot of stuff that would just complicate the user interface, I think. But it does a pretty good job of having you pull parts, cars apart and then put them back together, swap things around. I guess it's very much what it would be like in the day of an actual mechanic. You get your orders, you have to go through a checklist. Sometimes you don't know what the problem is, so you have to read a thing about, oh, there's a weird rattling noise coming from the brakes, so then it's a brake issue, and then you take things off and inspect them, and then order parts, and then put them back together. All the while, you're kind of saving money to go and find cars that you can restore and build up yourself for your own leisure, and then you can race them, or you can take them and put them on, on the auction house to try and make a buck off of them. So it's not as it's not as narrow-minded as what I thought it was gonna be before I started playing it, and it's actually quite good. I'm enjoying it. It is a bit of a grind in terms of the 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 bread and butter sort of gameplay aspect, which is just fulfilling orders to make money. That does get a bit grindy, but at the same time, like I said, I've actually kind of learnt quite a bit. I think I could probably change the brakes on a car now. It does a pretty good job of modeling all that stuff if I had the tools. Some other stuff probably not, but I've learned a fair bit about how a car goes together and what different parts do, which is kind of interesting. I wouldn't have thought that I'd learned that much technical knowledge from what is just a game.
Forgive me for doubting you, but that sounds awfully like people playing Guitar Hero and then being like, I reckon I'd be a pretty decent lead guitarist for Guns N' Roses. I reckon I could do it. But I'm sure you're more making the point that it gives you an idea of what you need to do and what the parts look like, which, fair enough.
That's right, yeah.
Not realizing
I
that
was-
they're
I was-
playing like elaborate Tetris.
JC, he's gonna just fix the brakes on his car and then go street racing because that's the next thing that happens in
Hey,
Car Mechanic 2018.
I gotta say, and I'm not going to name names here, but I had a friend many, many years ago, someone who was known to both me and JT, who was really into first-person shooters, and once told me that he thought it'd be pretty fun to join the army because he likes playing Battlefield. So
No, holy
yeah,
crap,
that's a real thing.
Yeah. He's in for a shock when he realizes respawning is strictly video game.
Yeah. He didn't.
Hey,
He didn't
JT.
join the army.
Thank goodness. Hey, I was going to ask. you mentioned the racing. Is that a large part of the game? Like, have they invested much time and effort into that, or is it kind of just standalone races and you're just really getting the car out on the road to see how you've done?
Probably the latter. It's not a huge part of the game, but it is a game that you sort of strive to get to because you want to see how well the car is that you've put together fares in terms of its resale value, and a good way to know if it's going to make enough money is to put it out on like a test track and then race it or race it against other cars and see what the time is going to be because it's a good way to see how well you've put the car back together. It does a pretty solid job of showing you what to do. It's not like it's quite hard to forget to put a part on, but it is possible. And sometimes, you'll forget to put something on and then you'll take it out on the track. And then there'll be all this like wear and tear on one side of the car. And you're like, why did that happen? And it's because you forgot to put a rubber bushing in, which is like a little cylinder thing that stops something from rubbing up against something else. Like very small details like that help you determine how good your car's going to be at an auction.
So I wanted to know about the driving stuff as well. You actually kind of play it in terms of you drive the car when it kind of goes out of the garage, because I guess I'm thinking of games like Motorsport Manager where you kind of do mechanical stuff behind the scenes, but then when the cars drive you just kind of watch them race, but there's actually like an engine for the game that you drive the cars around in.
Yeah, there's a physics engine in terms of driving. It's not amazing, but it does the job. They've put a decent amount of work into it to make it to sell the fact that you've built this car up, and there's different aspects to a car's handling performance, and you can tell the difference, and you can tell when something isn't up to scratch. So they've done a pretty good job of that. But because the main part of the game is obviously set in the workshop, then it's not, I wouldn't say it feels like an afterthought, but it's just definitely not what you're playing the game for.
How much freedom is there in the workshop? Like, someone brings in their car, does it kind of tell you what the problem is and you must do A, B, and C to this piece and then replace that bit and then tighten up this? Or does it kind of let you go, all right, let's take a look at what's under the hood and you try and find the problem yourself? Does it let you kind of like, does it just do it and then it's done, or does it get down into the minutia of like budgeting the fix and telling the customer what it's going to cost and that kind of stuff? Like, how in depth are they getting with it all?
It's pretty in depth. I've been to mechanics before, a bunch of times, and this definitely feels like the interactions that I've had with the mechanics themselves. And so to put it in a bit of a view for you to imagine, you will get an order. It's like you've got like a radial menu with all these things. There's like an order thing. Click on that, and there's several orders, and you've got a few minutes to choose which orders you want before they go away and it changes to a different thing. It tells you what the order is based around. So it'll have like a little brake symbol or suspension symbol or exhaust or engine or bodywork if you're going to be uh, changing that out. But I haven't really had too many of those yet. And then on the right-hand part of that menu, it gives you a list of the parts that need to be changed, but not always. Sometimes it'll just say part not discovered, and you actually have to go through the car and find it, examine each part. Not each part, but the parts that are hinted at in the clues of what's wrong with it. Because it might say, parts not discovered, but the customer has said that their brakes are not as good as what they used to be. So that's obviously a pretty clear clue that there's something that needs to be swapped on the brakes. You start off with a small workshop where you can really only work on one car at a time, and you slowly earn XP, and you can add on parts to the workshop, and different uh, things that advance what you can and can't work on, like a repair bench where you can, beat panels and fix them up yourself instead of having to order things in. And then, things like tire changes and spring pullers and all the different tools you might need to test a battery or electrical components. That's all unlocked through like a level system, which is actually quite cool. It's, look forward to, spending each point. He's like, oh, cool. Now I can get a tablet so I don't have to walk over to the computer to order my parts. I've got a tablet. I can just do it in my hand now. Makes the game, much easier, much easier to fulfill orders. Really does go quite in depth. I mean, for me to go through all the aspects would take, you know, the better part of the entire pod, but it does a pretty good job at modeling everything.
That kind of workshop progression sounds really cool. Like, I always like that kind of stuff in games where you kind of have, it's almost like upgrading a base or something like that. It's always really satisfying when, like you say, you expand, add a new area, or just kind of get new equipment which streamline things. Like that's always a fun sort of like reward mechanic that games have. So that sounds cool.
It is really cool. It's really cool in terms of you trying to make your workflow as efficient as possible, because there's stuff like a lot of components without the specialized tools or areas, you need to take them off to inspect them. But say if you have an area, I'm just trying to think of what it's called. It's called like a service lane where you put a car in there and it's got the dynos that test out the wheels, and also plugs into the car and tests a whole bunch of stuff straight from the engine. Normally, without that, you would have to take the engine apart and inspect each component and be like, this is worn, this is worn, this is bad. But with that thing that you unlock, it tests a whole bunch of components automatically. And then you can switch to something called an overview mode, which sort of makes the car go see-through. And it shows you things that you have either examined or things that have been picked up by a tool. And then it makes it much easier for you to diagnose and fix things. So the progression part is super important, and yeah, it is really, really rewarding. And there's some stuff like you can't paint parts until you unlock the necessary equipment and areas. So if you want to repaint your car or, fix a car and weld like off rust and then rebuild a panel and then paint it, you need a whole bunch of specialized equipment that you unlock. And then you also need the painting room where you put the car in and actually paint it properly. That's also where you put on like livery and decals and things. So the unlock system's really, really rewarding. Really, really enjoy it, and they've actually put a lot of thought into it. I think the people who make this game probably either consult with or are qualified mechanics themselves. So it's it's a great part of the game, the progression.
So this sounds like it's one of those kind of, they got the kind of games I really like, where it's a sandbox simulator where you never like finish it, right? It just, you kind of choose what your path is through this game.
Yeah, absolutely. There are story orders. They're called story orders, and it tells you what that is. And they're like a really, really huge order that's generally a next tier. It unlocks the next tier of what you might see in an order, which really translates to the new types of orders you see after doing each story order will be harder and harder and harder. And the story orders also, they don't give you a list of what's wrong. They're generally the longer orders that you will spend a lot of time working on the car. But in terms of that end game, for instance, now I'm still haven't finished modifying and building my own car. And I'll get a bit into how you find these cars in just a moment. But, you might spend hours and hours and hours, or perhaps even your entire time playing the game, if you played for like 40, 50 hours, working towards, cool, I've got this new muscle car that I found in a barn, and you spend the better part of the game when you're not doing the orders fixing it up and choosing the rims and all the things that you want to, make it look or swapping an engine out and making it sound different and things like that.
Right, so
So
you have like your own projects on the side as well. That's cool.
yeah, yeah, and one of the progressions is unlocking, more car park space to put your own cars in, because that's
Mm.
exactly what that's for. But in terms of finding these cars, you can go to an auction and auction in a car. I haven't actually gotten to that point yet. I've only been able to sell my car at an auction, but you can buy them. You also can go to a showroom if you want to buy a brand new car, but they're generally the most expensive ones. But one of the things you do as you get XP, every so often you get these crates, and if in a crate you get brand new parts like random, and you also sometimes get a map that has a barn location on it. And for the uninitiated, a barn in terms of building or buying a car is where you go to find like cheap car parts, or maybe a car that someone's forgotten about, and it's called a barn find. I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with the term,
Mm-hmm.
but that's where that's where I've found the car I'm working on at the moment. It's just like, you get one chance to go to a barn. So once you get a location on your map, you go there. You can't go back to it once you leave. So you kind of, it's a little bit of there's some stakes involved. So because you might have like 5 barns unlocked and so much money to spend, and you might go, oh, cool, there's a really, really good condition car here, but it's not the car I want. So do I risk getting this one now, you know, or do I risk it even further and see what the other barns have involved? Um,
That sounds
and
really
you're
cool.
yeah, and it's not just cars that you find in there. You also find like there's like shelves and things. You look through the shelves and there's you might find some used parts or some rare parts. So it's a good way to get stuff from the barn finds. And yeah,
And in terms of like you're talking about wanting to have money to buy these cars and not burning through all your cash. If you buy these cars for your own kind of pleasure and do them up and whatever, does the game give you the option to sell them as well?
yeah. So you sell them at the auction.
Sorry if I missed that before.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, so there's the auction system, and you take them there, and that's where you try and there's a bit of a barter system. Not massively complicated, but it's where you can go and sell the cars that you've done up. But orders go straight into the pocket of the person. So that's not, you don't really need to, you know, that's just like an automated system in the game.
That's
Right.
that whole system with like doing up your own cars. That sounds really intriguing. Like, I like the idea already of the really in-depth car mechanic simulator. It's probably not something I would play, but I can see how it appeals to like a certain kind of niche there. But the sort of the other path here you're talking about, where you get barn finds, or you can buy cars on auction and do them up, and you kind of can have your own little garage of cars that, with the simulation being this detailed, I guess you really feel like you've built these cars. That's super cool. Like that gets me interested in playing this.
Yeah, and I really love the barn find system, because when you're walking through there, sometimes it's like one car, two car, maybe three cars, and depending on the size of the barn. And you know nothing about the car, only what you can see with your eyes. So you can, if you want to inspect it, you can't really take it apart. Um, at first, you need to unlock some specialized tools to be able to look into the barn finds a bit more. But at just sort of face value, it'll give you the value of the barn find, and it might say $10,000. But the thing is that that number is arbitrary. You might think, oh, it's $10,000. That's a good price. But when you actually take it back to the shop, that's just that owner has, price gouged it, and you find out that there's way more wrong with it than what you thought would have been based on what you paid for it. And so that's where it's up to you to sort of really inspect the car in the barn. Um, at a further point in the game, you can take parts off and only pay for those individual parts.
In terms
But
of in terms of like assessing a car like that at the barn, do you kind of like, do you level up in terms of being able to do that, or is that actually something
Yes.
that you? Okay, yeah, you do.
At first, it's all up to you, but then you start to unlock things like um, 3 parts at random when you first see a car will automatically tell you in the overview mode what the conditions are. So it gives you a bit of a clue as to like, okay, well, I can see now straight away that the head gasket on this car is completely shot, and that's one of the most expensive things to replace. So I'm not going to bother with that. And that ability, I guess it's sort of simulating like, you getting just a bit of firsthand uh, on the spot experience, just sort of having a bit of an intuition about what the car's condition is. And that levels up throughout the game. I'm not sure how many levels are. I think there's 35.
Yeah, that's cool. That makes sense though. Like, you'd get better at kind of like eyeballing the problems.
Yeah, praising things and
Yeah, yeah.
and I guess that's sort of what that's simulating in that instance.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And if you've been price gouged, you're feeling you're feeling that in your wallet, and you're needing some more cash. Are you able to price gouge your customers? Can you like overcharge for repairs you're doing, or are those prices kind of set?
You those so when you replace things, that portion is set, but in true mechanics simulation style, you can change parts that don't need to be changed, and then that cost will then be passed on to the
Ooh.
customer. So, but the thing is that when you try and do that, um, there's a chance that you may not get like a return customer or something like that. So it does affect, you have to be sneaky if you want to go down that route, but it's one way to make a little bit of extra cash. I haven't had to do it yet. I've more just been going with it and then selling all the parts I get from the crates, and that makes pretty good money. I haven't gone to sell my car yet. So, but I know that when you go to take something to auction, there's a bit of leeway in the price that you can look for as well. It doesn't just give you a hard price and say, this is what your car's worth. You can, obviously, like it tears up depending on how good your car is. But there's a bit of a barter system involved there.
All the cars that like you find from the barns or you buy from auctions and things like that, are any of those licensed, or is it kind of generic cars, like
Okay.
generic muscle car sort of thing?
So the base game is all generic, and you can see what they've modeled the car actually on. So there's like a car that is quite clearly a Corvette or something, but it's called the Lightning or something. But the DLC, there are licensed DLC packs. So there's
Mhm.
like off the top of my head, there's probably 10. There's like Mazda, there's like a Dodge. I think there's a BMW one, or maybe Mercedes. I can't quite remember what else is in there, but there's a bunch of licensed DLCs. Oh, sorry, it's a dog.
What DLC is that dog?
You might want to just cut that part of my thing out.
So we had to pause for a second there because JT's dog went crazy, but we're going to keep talking about Car Mechanics Simulator. Do you remember where you're at, JT?
Vaguely, somewhat. We were talking about the auction system.
Right, or maybe licensed
and
cars.
reselling your cars. No,
and
sorry, the
stuff.
licensed cars. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say that I feel like with this sounds like a very PC game. I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of mods around with licensed cars being put into the game, possibly.
There's a bunch of mods available. It is actually on consoles as well. I looked
Okay.
it up because I've actually been letting my partner's son play this as well, because he's actually interested in becoming a mechanic when he's older, at this stage anyway. And he's been really enjoying it and learning a lot as well. And because he plays on Xbox, we were sort of looking, instead of him having to use my PC all the time for it, if we just get it for him on that. But then obviously you're sort of getting away from what's available from the community.
Mm-hmm.
Now the thing is that I'm not sure what's going on with that, because in the game, when you use the computers, it's got like it's set up a little bit like like a fake browser, where there's the addresses, and you've kind of like almost like in GTA 5 when you buy different things, you can go to various sections, and one of the sections is like community body parts or community parts. Clicking on that doesn't give anything back, and I actually am not sure if the Steam Workshop is available for this yet, but I do know people that there is a modding community, though I haven't really seen how streamlined it is in terms of getting stuff into the game. So something I'll probably have to check out once I start to get a bit sick of the base game and see what people have made.
So, like I said before, this kind of has me more interested than I expected when we were coming into discussing this game, because I've seen you playing this a lot. I didn't really know what it was, but some of this sounds intriguing. I like cars, as we've discussed in previous episodes, but I don't know heaps about the mechanics, and I don't know if I want to spend hours learning that. How kind of helpful is the game in terms of tutorials and guides and stuff, in terms of getting me through those things? Like, is this kind of approachable for someone who knows kind of nothing about the inner workings?
It is, but I say that loosely because the game is just not good in terms of throwing you in to an environment where you learn things progressively. The tutorial is literally just the fully unlocked garage, and then you can go around and have a look at what each thing does, but it doesn't really show you how the game mechanics work. And so there was a lot of guessing around and trial and error, figuring out what to do. I should also say a lot of Googling,
Mm.
because I didn't know that the tutorial could just be skipped and then you go straight into the game. From the first part of the game where you're starting from scratch without the unlocked garage and all the components that the tutorial has, it's actually easier to start from that. And so the tutorial does not do a good job of preparing you for how the game really works. It's just more of a showcase of what is unlockable in the game.
I don't
And
I
there's
don't necessarily mind that. I feel like a lot of games kind of like I get put off a lot of games, and I guess this is more of a mobile game problem I think I've spoken about before. Um, where the game keeps saying, now do this, now do that, now do this. And I'm kind of just clicking through it and not really taking it in because it's not giving me any other option. And so what you were first describing there of just walking around the garage and getting to take everything in and pick things up and the showcase kind of thing, I like that. I guess it sounds like they didn't quite stick the landing, seeing as though you had to Google a lot of different stuff. But yeah, I don't mind that they've gone for that, I suppose.
yeah, you it might be. I think you might be able to get into it if that's sort of how you prefer to learn from a tutorial. There's a lot to do in the game, but the thing is sometimes you might be you might think, "Okay, cool, I'm gonna go to the auction house now," but the problem is that it doesn't unlock straight away, and it doesn't tell you how to unlock things or how certain things are meant to work. I guess there's a lot of assumed knowledge in there. But in terms of actually taking things apart, putting things back together, and not really talking about the the other aspects of the game like orders and barn finds and things, that does work quite well. There's a little bit of guest play there, but it's not too bad. And so you can probably pick it up, within like 15 minutes on how that's meant to work. For instance, if you're taking like a wheel off, or let's say you're taking the brake system off, you there's different modes, and that's pretty well streamlined. There's like unmount mode, and there's like a ghost image of what things are meant to be put in place before you can put something else in. And if something can't go in yet, it'll tell you. It gives you like a bottom, and it tells you what parts need to come off.
Right.
That's pretty helpful, and that's so in that part of the game, and that's what most of the game is. That's not too bad. But in terms of a tutorial where it says, "Hey, I am your buddy who's gonna show you how the game works. Click next to continue." There's absolutely none of that. That's in this kind of game, I think I would have preferred just a little bit of that, even if it wasn't showing you absolutely everything. And at the very least, I think I might have wanted some tooltips, but there's none of that either. So I did feel a bit overwhelmed at the start.
Okay.
But now that I know how it works, it is very, very easy. But there's not a great deal at the start of the game.
That's not too bad. Like, I don't necessarily want a tutorial that, like you say, kind of steps you through everything and you have to sort of follow a very linear path to learn it all. Because I think part of the fun of those games is discovering stuff for yourself. But I guess the thing I was worried about was like if you had to do some kind of work on the engine of a car and it just gave you like, the kind of empty space in the car and then 50 parts on the ground and you had to figure out how it went together, then at that point I'd be like, I have no idea where to start. But the kind of things you're saying about it's sort of giving you an outline of the piece you need or not letting you put the wrong piece on, like that sounds good enough to be able to sort of puzzle your way through it.
Yeah, it's pretty well set up in that regard. Like I said earlier, it is possible to forget to put something on, but it's very rare, and generally if that does happen, it's pretty easy to find out what part you forgot because for the most part, it gives you a thing saying like, all right, the next things you need to put on here are the steering rack and then the tie rod, and it shows you exactly what parts need to get put on so that, if you forget something, you can just go straight to the order machine and order in a part. And then it comes, when you order something, it comes straight into your inventory and it's ready to go.
So, JT, I'm kind of curious. Like, I know you like Sims. You touched on that at the start of this. But in the time I've known you, you've never struck me as like a massive car guy. And I'm curious as to what made you decide to invest time and money into this particular game. Like, does it look particularly good? Like, visually, that made you go, oh, maybe I'll give this a go? Like, had you heard about it favorably? Like, what made you go, I'm going to buy Car Mechanic Simulator 2018?
That is a really good question. Can't really remember what possessed me to even add it to my Steam wish list. It was ages ago. I think it was probably in there for about a year and a half. Don't get me wrong, like I am as much into cars as what any other guy is, I guess, but I'm probably more interested in things like Ferraris and, I guess you could call like more unattainable cars. And I love rally and F1. This doesn't really have those kind of cars in it, and obviously it's a mechanic simulation game. Um, I think part of it is just I've always liked to know how things work, and I've always liked taking things apart and trying to fix things. So I think it was sort of appealing to that sort of inner child aspect of me, I guess. So I think that's probably where that came from, though I'm not sure if I'm being totally honest. That game in particular, I'm not sure. Hey, you know what? There's actually another game that's sort of similar, but it's a little bit more tongue in cheek called My Summer Car, and it's known as the Finland Simulator, and that has a really in-depth mechanic simulation aspect to it. Probably more so than this game because it doesn't show you what parts you need and things. But that game also has stuff like, you have to drive to get beer and you've got like a drunk meter and you have to like take a whiz every now and then and just, you can get pulled over by the cops. It's obviously a lot more funny, but it has a very, very highly regarded sort of enthusiast level mechanic part to that. And that's a game that I've also wanted to play at some point. And then I heard about this game, I think, and then added it to my wish list as well. But yeah, I snapped it up because it was cheap on Steam. So that's the long answer to that question, Timmy.
I haven't played this game, obviously. That's clear from our discussion so far. But I guess kind of broadly thinking about your question, Timmy, I do find that there's something kind of appealing about a sandbox simulator, which is just kind of like really deep in detail and quite kind of slow in terms of progression. Like something that you can kind of just like spend a day kind of plugging away at rather than, sort of rushing through a game that has like a linear story or a game that kind of guides you the whole way through. I do enjoy a kind of mundane simulator where you just sort of make your way through it at your own pace. Like I would probably even say something like Project Zomboid is a bit like that. Like you could spend an entire day in that game just like moving boxes and furniture and stuff like that, or chopping down trees because you got to build a fence. And I guess maybe JT, I feel like maybe there's something of the appeal of that in a game like this as well.
Yeah, for sure. Look, one part of the game I really like is the the the, the audio in the game, and when you're like unscrewing things, it's really really satisfying to hear parts come off and go on, and then the screws tightening, and that part of the game they've just nailed. A little bit of ASMR, I guess you could call it in a way, but it's really satisfying to see parts fit together and everything sort of to come together is just a super satisfying part to it. Like you mentioned, it is mundane. This is one of those simulators that it's not like there's explosions and special effects and things happening. It's really all about how mediocre the gameplay is in terms of what you actually experience. But it does it really well. And, you can have, a bit of music going off in the background. There's actually a radio in the game. You can like change different stations and stuff. But you can sort of get lost in just doing, these little tasks for a long time.
Yeah, I get that.
But that just about wraps it up for Car Mechanic Simulator for me. There's a lot more in the game that I could talk about, but I won't right now because there's still a lot more of the game for me to experience. But Timmy, I understand that you've been getting into some more Disney stuff. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I actually hadn't thought about the fact that last episode I spoke about playing a Disney board game, and this week just about the only game I've played any of is a Disney video game. So the game I have been jumping into is one called Rush, a Disney Pixar Adventure game, I think is the full title. But Rush ostensibly. And basically, I just been pulled into this one because the boys have been playing a whole lot of it, and occasionally they need one or the other of them gets bored and they need someone to finish the level with them, and it was actually a lot of fun. So I just kind of ended up playing a whole lot of this with the boys. To take it back a second, the reason you might not be recognizing the title is because it has a generic title, because it actually incorporates levels and characters from just about every Disney Pixar film, which is kind of cool. I've played a whole bunch of racing levels based on the Cars movies. I've done a few different ones with the Ratatouille characters, and I've chased the house attached to balloons from Up to try and get it grounded again. And every single level has just been really simple, satisfying fun. Like obviously Disney Pixar are known for, family entertainment, so it's a kind of all ages sort of game. It's called Rush because like every level is kind of timed and they all seem kind of racy, like the Cars ones especially, but generally there's something ahead of you that you're trying to get to, and there is a timer which is going to it's not a time limit, but it lets you know how long you've taken on the level. And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think you can unlock more things or score higher on your end results of the levels by doing it in quicker times.
So is this like, am I reading this right? Is this like a Mario Party type game almost? Like it's a bit of a medley of different styles?
Not really. From the I've played like maybe 4 or 5 different levels across 3 different kind of movie character worlds, and they all differ a little bit, but they're all very much camera firmly planted behind the character, and you're trying to get to the end of a course. So, for example, the Cars ones, as you can guess, you are tearing down the road trying to catch the person at the start. Sometimes there are like tokens you have to drive through, and every time you get 3, it sets off a bomb or something like that. Um, In the Ratatouille one, it's again, you're racing across the rooftops to get from point A to point B, but along the way, you have to stop and quickly solve these little puzzles to open the next gate. They're not too hard. It's like work together to fling yourself on a little catapult. Like one of you jumps on the end and flings a partner, and then once they're up high, they can hit the button to open the gate. Then you'll have to climb back down and get back on your merry way, sort of thing. In Up, you're working together to catch up to the house, which is connected to all the balloons, and grab onto the rope and hopefully ground it before it takes off. That kind of thing. So that I haven't experienced it being like Mario Party in that it's a whole bunch of different mini games. They're all generally based on getting through a course. Like if it was going from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, the kind of things you're doing are very side scroller platformy. It's just that you're behind the characters generally. Um, but
So what
it
would you in terms of like style, what have you played that is similar to this? What does it remind you of if you're to compare it to something else?
um, you know what? Like I guess credit where it's due. It's not like a lot of other stuff. Like they've really made an effort to keep it pretty simple. Like a lot of the time you do have like, two or three different options of the course you're taking, but it's always heading forward. You're never really going to get turned around. So being that these are games aimed at like capturing everyone from like 4 years old up to, the parents or grandparents that are entertaining their kids with it, they've made it simple enough that anyone can play it, but with enough variety and a little bit of problem solving that is going to keep most anyone engaged. And because they're all kind of like stages, I guess it's not really like much else to me. Like, it's because what happens is you've got kind of like an overworld where you're kind of in like a theme park, I suppose. There's like this big open area, and you can go to the cars area, and then there's three different, uh, I don't know, kind of statues or sculptures or play areas, and you go up to them and you activate the stage. And then once you complete that, it unlocks more of this theme park, for lack of a better word. It's just all these other kids running around, and they say, "Hey, let's go play on the Ratatouille world," and you go over there, and it's a mini Eiffel Tower, and you talk to a kid, and then you start the Ratatouille level, and you are Remy and the other characters from Ratatouille running across rooftops. So I'm rambling a little bit here, but I guess it's because I can't think of anything else it's really like. I guess I haven't played a lot of games specifically aimed at kids, but yeah, this is pretty unique. It's not complex, but I can't think of anything else that it's like, if that makes sense.
It's pretty cool. It's kind of rare these days, I guess, to come
Yeah,
across something that doesn't really strike anything else in terms of memory.
yeah, and just a weird coincidence I wanted to bring up as well. Friend of the show, Josh, who often sends in letters that we answer, actually sent me a message with a picture of the game saying, "Hey, this is a really good game to play with kids." And then he sent me a video of one of his kids playing it. And it just so happened that not only did he send that to me at the exact moment I was playing that game with one of the boys here, the video that he sent me, his daughter was actually playing the exact same level that I was currently playing with one of the
Whoa.
boys. So it was like really, really nuts. I've known Josh for years, like he could have sent me that at like any time. And not only did he send it to me right when I was playing it, we were even playing the same level.
Are there 5G towers near both your houses?
Yep, Josh's big data, and our phones are definitely listening. But yeah, hey, that's kind of all I've really managed to get to playing. But I thought of another gaming related thing I've been doing that I meant to share with you guys last episode that I forgot. Um, Listeners will remember that I recently got an Xbox One X, and Shayla and I immediately decided we needed to get an additional controller so that we could play some co op stuff and whatnot. And so we did that. But then Shayla, being the creative sort that she is, decided that it'd be cool to customize the controllers ourselves, because when you fire up the Xbox and set it all up, it's got this great wallpaper with all these different colored Xbox controllers, but pretty much all you can get in most stores are black or white, and you can get custom ones on eBay and stuff. But everywhere we were looking, because of the pandemic and everything, were really short on everything. And we were told that controllers were going like wildfire, and EB were only getting black ones, and they were getting snapped up straight away. So we just grabbed black ones, and then Shayla did a little bit of research on how to open them up. And we took them apart and kind of spray painted our controllers in a couple of different designs. I did mine in just like a pretty plain purple because that's my favorite color, but Shayla did like a baby pink and then splattered it with blue and purple as well. It's got this really cool artistic design. Hers is kind of glossy and mine is matte, and we decided to leave different parts of it black and whatnot. But yeah, I just thought that was really cool. And if people are interested, I can chuck up a photo in our on our Instagram as well, which is just at Disc and Dice on Instagram.
I think you should, because you sent that to us and they looked good. They didn't look like, someone's amateur job at home. They looked like, they were really nicely done. And the thing I actually thought of is back in the day, I painted my Xbox 360 faceplate because I wanted a red one and there wasn't a red one. So I took the faceplate off and painted that. But I can say it did not look anywhere near as good as yours. I think I used a brush rather than spray. So, that's
the risk.
I'm already at a big disadvantage. But yeah, that kind of occurred to me then that I'd done that. I wonder whether I guess the detachable faceplate is more about selling you specially designed faceplates, but it's kind of cool that it has that functionality as well, that you can take them off and get artistic yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize that on the 360 there was a easily detached faceplate for doing that with. That's pretty cool. That makes me think of the old Nokia 3210s, how the selling point of that phone was you could buy different covers from everywhere and they were mass produced. You get any kind of thing you wanted.
Totally.
You too can have a jelly beans cover for your Xbox One X.
What, actually sticking jelly beans on?
Well, I mean, that's next level, Timmy. I was thinking just a picture, but go your hardest for real jelly beans.
It's funny. I mentioned to Shayla that we should start selling our services on something like Fiverr. That service where you put up I can mow your lawns kind of thing. And we kind of had a bit of a laugh about it. And then once I posted these on my Instagram, I immediately had a couple of my mates being like, "Hey, can you do that for me?" So we might have to actually explore that side business.
Yeah, I've seen some really, really cool stuff people have done with their Xbox controllers and I guess the front of them. Like wood finish and just really, really interesting sort of stuff that you just wouldn't even thought. Like one that had like a weird sponge material as like a loafer or whatever it is, like that material. So I guess it's smoothing your hands as you play. Really weird mods, but people get creative out there. I love it.
They do.
Yeah, you mentioned, JT, that you wanted to make one that looks kind of like, I can't remember how you described it, like old
Oh yeah,
school military kind of like tans and khakis and stuff. And it made me think of the original Alien films and Alien Isolation, how everything kind of has that really retro big
old
feel.
like 70s or maybe early 80s computer tech where it's like brown and beige. That kind of finish. It just looks, it's ugly as heck, but it's so striking now because it hasn't been around for ages.
So
I'd like to do that with my computer as well.
You want a current gen console that looks like an old 486 PC, that kind of thing.
Yes. I've always wanted to do that. And I've always wanted to do that kind of modding with my PC as well. But there's not a lot of companies that really just stock stuff like that. So you kind of have to do it yourself, and it's not easy. But yeah, that kind of finish I'd love. So if you ever figure out how to do that, Timmy, I would gladly pay for your services.
Yeah, I was going to say I can do, but it's going to cost you. Hey, look, before we started recording, we're talking about how This is going to be a short episode. We're not going to be able to fill it like we normally do based on how little all of us have played. But we got so into car mechanic there that we're actually running right on time. So we might take a short break and then come back to get into what Paul's been playing for either a short or long discussion. There's no way to know.
We are back from our short break. We're going to throw to Paul, who's going to tell us all about what he has been getting up to and the one game that he's been getting into as well.
Yeah, exactly. Just like you guys, I've got one thing to talk about for this episode, but it is something I've played heaps of, even though it's just the one game, and it's Total War Warhammer. And I don't know how many hours I've put into this over the last couple of weeks and a bit before that as well. But the Total War strategy games, possibly familiar to people. It's a fairly well-known series, I think, but it's kind of a mix of turn-based strategy where you kind of manage your empire and then real-time battles when you fight people. And that's kind of the thing for that series. Total War is generally known for the historical titles. I guess probably the Rome Total War games are maybe the most famous, and they've done like medieval ones and things like that. But a few years back, they got the Warhammer license, and they have made 2 games now set in the Warhammer universe, and it's really kind of turned out to be just a perfect fit for this series. And this is my first time playing the Warhammer games. This one came out a few years back, actually. It might have been like 2015 or 2016, I think. I'm not exactly sure. But I've only just got around to playing it now. JT and I were kind of talking before the show about how Total War games seem to be the ones that you pick up real cheap in Steam sales, and then you just never get around to playing them. And it's been a bit like that for me. I just kind of put this one off and off. But recently, I've kind of made a point of trying to play some of these games. And so, yeah, I've been playing a lot of this one. I guess the first thing to say is that I really, really like the setting. The Warhammer setting kind of, it fits all the game mechanics of Total War really well, and it adds a lot of flavor to that universe. I really like the historical games that they do, being kind of a bit of a history guy anyway. They always do a really nice job of kind of capturing the eras that they look at. They've done an equally good job of capturing the atmosphere of Warhammer here. Specifically, this is the fantasy Warhammer universe, not their Warhammer 40k sci-fi world. And this first game has about 4 or 5 factions from the tabletop game, and then the second game adds a bunch more. And one of the things that Warhammer adds to this is it makes each of the factions you play really, really different. So in a normal historical Total War game, for example, in Rome, you have all your different factions like the Romans and the Greeks and the Gauls and the Egyptians and things like that. But because you're dealing with human history and a bunch of forces fighting with various armies for around that time, everyone's using kind of the same technology. So while you have slight variations between factions, if it's kind of a sword and shield type era, everyone's using swords and shields. Whereas with Warhammer, they're able to kind of throw that realism out the window. So I was playing as the Empire from the one campaign I've done, and they're kind of like the generic human faction that have a pretty balanced roster of kind of medieval era type units, and then they have a bunch of magic and stuff like that. But coming up against all the other factions is super interesting in this, because they all have interesting mechanics that like significantly set them apart from a standard Total War faction, and the units you come up against are really different. So in a historical game, you'd come up against armies which were slight variations on yours. Like maybe they have a bit more cavalry, or maybe their archers are a bit stronger. Something like that. That would be the differences. Whereas I'm playing this one and I'm fighting like the vampire counts, and they raise hordes of skeletons that never retreat, and they just come at you in waves, and they have flying bats that can kind of bypass the lines that you set up for your army and attack your artillery and behind and things like that. And just having that kind of diversity in the factions, they really feel kind of asymmetrical in a way that I haven't felt before in a Total War game, and it's really quite refreshing to play this Total War. And it's made me feel, after doing just one campaign, which probably took me about 20 to 30 hours for one campaign, I'm even more keen now to go back in and try one of the other factions like dwarves or vampires or chaos, because I know that I won't just be playing, medieval era with slightly stronger this kind of unit. I'll be playing a totally different kind of game, which is really cool.
So my ears pricked up at the mention of asymmetrical there, and I wanted to talk to you about, or ask you rather, about balance, because obviously you and I have enjoyed a number of asymmetrical games before. Straight to mind comes Netrunner, obviously very different. We're talking a card game there, and it's a very large asymmetrical, disparity. But I'm wondering, like, obviously in a strategic game like that, if it's asymmetrical, you've got some factions that are going to be able to build really quickly at the start of the game and then kind of plateau, and others that it's going to be a slow rate of pace until they're, super powerful if you can survive long enough and be patient. Do you feel like they balance out quite nicely, or if someone can get the hang of one or the other, they're going to have an advantage? Like, how do they balance out, the asymmetry you're talking about?
It's an interesting question, because I have a kind of opinion on balance in single player strategy games, which is that I don't feel they should be, because I feel that kind of, if it's single player specifically, fun is the most important thing. And so if you need to have unbalanced factions, but it makes it fun, then I'm kind of okay with that. And Total War has a little bit of that in its kind of, when you're playing a single player campaign, because some starts, as they call them, as in like starting with certain races and their lords, you pick like a lord for each race when you choose them. Some are considered easy and some are considered hard. So you don't have an equal start depending on who you choose. So for example, like the Empire, who I played as, are considered as like a normal start. But if you play as the dwarves, they have an easy start because they're already kind of set up to defend themselves in the mountains. Whereas someone like Chaos is considered a hard start because they can't found cities. All they can do is fight and kind of destroy territory. So I guess in the campaign sense, the game isn't balanced in a good way, I think, because the experience is different depending on each faction, and that's kind of the appeal of it to me. I wouldn't like it if every faction started the same way, if you get what I mean, because you want those different challenges. In terms of the individual battles, like the real-time battles that you have, that stuff is pretty well balanced. I guess the thing, kind of, as I mentioned before, is that each faction's strengths and weaknesses are... You're dealing with similar kinds of units to a normal Total War game, like infantry, artillery, cavalry, range troops, things like that. But the strengths and weaknesses are just really amplified. So you will have things like dwarves have no cavalry. So when you're playing against dwarves, it's kind of more important than ever to be more adaptive to what your enemy is doing. And in that sense, the game is quite good in terms of balance. So if you're aware of those things, if you're playing as a faction that has a very significant weakness, you will also have a very big strength somewhere else. And if you can kind of arrange your army composition and in the battle itself, kind of be aware of your tactics, then you won't find that you come up against armies that you just can't beat or things like that. But it's a really kind of fun system, because it means that, like, when I come up against, for example, Chaos, they all have a lot of armor because they're all kind of big Chaos warriors and things like that. And so when I go up against those guys, I have to kind of change my approach completely, because I need to deal with units that can take a lot of damage. Whereas if I fight something like Orcs, they have a lot of units, but they're all really weak. So I don't necessarily need things that can do heaps of damage to them. I can just kind of hold the line, and eventually I'll whittle them down. And I'm finding, compared to other Total War games, that I have to do a lot more adapting when I fight each race. Whereas in historical Total War games, I kind of get a really good army together, and I knew that with a little bit of a tweak in terms of my tactics, then I can kind of deal with anything like that.
One thing that really sort of blew me away when I first saw the trailers for uh, Warhammer Total War. And I guess one of the things that I imagine would be a huge departure from the historical part of the series is that in Warhammer, one of the things that you can get, and I'm referring back to the tabletop game here, um, and how it sort of moves into the Total War video game, is that you can get these like giant units, like almost like a boss unit, and that obviously doesn't exist in real life. You don't have a big like ogre or dragon or some kind of huge unit that it takes a lot to take down. That just wouldn't exist historically. So it's kind of interesting to see that in a Total War game, let alone with obviously the Warhammer license. But I remember seeing that in the trailer and being like, I need to play this at some point, because one thing in Warhammer that you don't really get from the tabletop game is like a sense of scale. It's obviously you've got your armies, but they're more, if you're really talking about the battles that go on the tabletop, they're more like skirmishes. And so it's really cool to see that sense of scale actually be sort of fleshed out with the Warhammer world. So, like, how does when you've got some of those like jumbo units that obviously you take a lot more firepower and hit, got a lot more hit points, how do they sort of change what happens on the battlefield? Like, is it like, if someone manages to get like a Demon of Tzeentch, for instance, like, does that sort of like, is it game over for the opposition, or how do the dynamics change once you start bringing in the larger units?
It's never game over, because the balance of the real-time battles, there's always kind of a rock paper scissor thing at play in Total War. More variations than just 3, but it's that same kind of circular, something beats something, but there's always something that beats that. And so it's kind of just being aware of what you need to counter that. So those kind of giant units, I think they're called monstrous units in the game, they are countered by spears, by like spearman units or halberdiers and things like that. So if I'm fighting a faction that I know is bringing a lot of monsters, then I need to make sure I have more of those. And I guess the other one that is kind of unique to Warhammer that hasn't been in the others is flying units, because like vampires have bats, or dwarves have like steampunk gyrocopters that they can kind of fly around, and some of the heroes you get can fly around on giant like griffins and things like that. It's all very like high fantasy style. And if you have units like that, you need to make sure you have like missile troops that can bring them down, because obviously your melee can't deal with it and stuff like that. So it's never a case of like you get a certain monster and that's game over. There are definitely really powerful ones, but if you kind of know what you're doing, there's always a counter. And if you kind of ignore army composition for the enemy and just bring the same army every time, then you can get stuck in a situation where you can't deal with the monsters and things like that.
Right.
But it's kind of fun. Like I said, it makes me care more about that than I have in previous Total War games. I guess the other unit that is similar to that I wanted to mention, it's kind of like the monsters. You now have heroes and lords. So in the other games, in the historical games, when you had kind of the leaders of your army, they weren't individually really powerful troops, because historically and realistically you don't get like a king that has twice the hit points of a peasant, or something like that. But because this is Warhammer and it's fantasy, that's absolutely what you get. So my lord unit for the Empire was King Karl Franz, and he has 5 times the hit points of everyone else. He flies on a griffin and he has like a magical hammer, and you can send a unit like that in and he'll just take out an entire squad of guys. And that's kind of like the monsters as well. So even if you don't have monsters, you have like magicians and heroes who are able to kind of go 1-to-1 with those guys in a very kind of epic fantasy style, which is cool.
just in terms of that, the original Total War being, historical, and this one not having those constraints. Do you know if this are the campaigns and the scenarios you're playing, are they based on existing Warhammer lore, or are they just like, recognizable characters or races and they're doing their own thing with it?
It's hard to say because I guess the Warhammer lore that it's drawing from is kind of it's a little bit like comic books. It's kind of stagnant in a way because no one can ever win or lose because it has to keep going forever because every army has to be somehow involved. So it's like Warhammer lore is kind of always that you have the sort of races of sort of humans, elves, dwarves, and etc., and all the others kind of fighting amongst themselves, but eventually then chaos comes down from the north and tries to destroy them, and that's kind of the setup for this campaign. But that's kind of been like the setup for the entire Warhammer world for decades. Has basically been like that's what happens in the storyline, and then eventually they beat back chaos, and then chaos comes again. So it's not like it's necessarily drawing on a very specific story from Warhammer. It's just kind of like it's the broad Warhammer narrative that is kind of the narrative in every sort of Warhammer story, if you get what I mean.
While we're talking about sort of the lore background and the world, I guess, can you give us a bit of an insight about where it's set? Because in the historical Total War games, you've got like your region map with all the different areas, and then you've on a more micro level, you've got then your battlefields. Does that work the same way? And like, if so, where is the setting? What part of the Warhammer universe is that set in?
In terms of the Warhammer universe, it's set in what they call the Old World, which is very much modeled on medieval Europe, and a lot of the factions they sort of fit roles a little bit like that. Like the Empire, who I played, they are modeled very closely on the Holy Roman Empire that covered like Germany and France in the Middle Ages. They are kind of a direct analogy for that. And then you kind of have the Empire territory, which is ringed by mountains where the dwarves are. And then up north, you have the snowy mountains and snowy regions, which is where all the chaos factions are, different like demons or tribes of chaos. And then beyond that, you have kind of wastelands where the orcs are. And then you have some forests where the wood elves are, sort of on the other side of those mountains. So the map is quite big. Like the campaign I played, there was probably half of the entire map that I never even went to the entire time, which I think is actually really cool. The idea that, I could start a different campaign and not only are the factions really different, but I'd be in a totally different part of the world and I'd be dealing with completely different geography and stuff like that, which is something I always like in these games. So the second Warhammer game, which is just Total War Warhammer 2, that expanded the world to add kind of like the new world, which again was kind of, at the time it's developed, this stuff is like it's a very kind of transparent analogy to the real world as well. And their new world is kind of like, it's a bit like the Americas as well. And they have like a faction called the Lizard Men who have sort of like Central and South American civilization type architectural styles. So they have kind of step pyramids and things like that. They look like Aztecs or Mayans and things like that.
Right.
And all that's added in the second game. I wanted to mention the second game because I played this for a little bit and I kind of felt like I really should just jump to the second game. But I haven't got it yet because it hasn't been on sale and it's still quite expensive. But they did a really cool thing where if you own the first game and the second game, there's an extra large map which is called Mortal Empires, where they basically stitch the two together and you can play a giant Warhammer sandbox using all of the factions from the first game and the second game. And the plan is that they have a Warhammer 3 game coming probably next year, which will be the last in the trilogy, and that will expand the map even further to include a bunch of other factions. So it's kind of a really cool long-term project, the whole Total War Warhammer series.
That sounds really cool. I'd be interested to see how that ultimately plans out with a third game involved. I wanted to know as well because like you mentioned earlier, um, it's easy to collect the Total War games and then just not play them because I'm in very much in that boat as we were talking about before we started the pod. Because only ever played the first one, but one thing I really loved doing in that were the sieges, the fort sieges, where you've set up your trebuchets and launch attacks and bring down the walls to penetrate the defenses. What's that like? Is that still a thing? Do you still have sort of like a loose base mechanic or siege weaponry or siege mechanics?
Yeah, sieges are still a really big part of the game. Like the way the map is set up, like the campaign map is you have provinces, and each province has kind of like a capital, and then it has settlements around it, which are smaller. And sort of by default, the capital will always have walls. So to take a capital, you'll always need to siege it. To take a settlement, you often don't have to siege it. You just kind of fight on the open field, and if you win, you take it. But they can be upgraded to have walls, so that it would be
Right.
like a siege battle. And yeah, when you have a siege battle, the siege battles are a little bit different. So in the ones you've played, which I guess are like maybe like Roman medieval, I think, from memory, were maybe the ones that you are familiar with. You usually you have a city and you can approach from any side. It's been simplified a little bit for Warhammer, which some people like, some people don't. I don't really have an opinion either way, but you only approach from one side, but you're given kind of a very detailed sort of battle map for one side. So you just have sort of a long stretch of wall, and then you approach it with, your siege towers and your battering rams. If you have flying units, you can bypass the walls. And, if you have siege equipment or artillery, you can attack the walls from a distance and things like that. So you don't have maybe as many options as in the older games in terms of attacking from different angles, but some of the maps inside the towns, like when you're sort of breaching the walls, some of them have really interesting things, like there are sort of different layers of defenses if it's a particularly fortified place. So maybe you kind of take the first wall, but then, there's an inner wall that you have to try and take as well, and things like that. So you can get some pretty good siege battles going. I would probably say that the siege battles are not the biggest strength of this game. I think the open field battles are probably better, and that's because of the diversity of units. When you get a siege battle, you kind of inevitably end up with a lot of units funneled through a very small gap, whether that be like a breach in the walls or the gates or something like that. And, while obviously that's kind of like realistic, I guess, for how the siege would have gone, it's not the most fun thing to play. When you've got monsters and flying units and magic, it's kind of more fun to have the open field there and be able to use all those elements. Whereas I guess for the historical games, the sieges maybe they work a bit better within that sort of setting.
Right. And I guess, it probably goes without saying, being a game that's quite recent, like units level up and there's sort of an experience aspect or leveling aspect, right? Surely.
Yeah, it has all that. Like your heroes and lords, who are kind of like your sort of special units in each army, they have full skill trees. So they level up and you get to kind of direct how they develop. So you can turn them into like, sort of one-man fighting machines who have like really high weapon damage and defense and things like that. Or you can turn them into kind of almost like support characters. So they have a lot of buffs. So they give like leadership to the troops around them, or they improve everyone's armor, or they get special abilities which, give everyone like a damage boost for 20 seconds and things like that. So that's kind of cool. You can sort of level up those guys to be most useful for your army. And then, yeah, you have all your troops gain experience, and, so their stats kind of slowly creep up as they go. That stuff's always really cool. Like I definitely get kind of attached to certain armies. I have like an army with a whole lot of troops who are at like gold rank, and they've been with me since the start, and because of that they're sort of extra powerful, and it's always kind of fun to have those sort of little narratives in the game.
Yeah, sort of make your own little story as you're playing.
Yeah, for sure. That that kind of leads a little bit, if we're talking about kind of the stories in the game, to what I think is probably the weak point of the Warhammer games, and I would say broadly speaking is still the weak point of the sandbox strategy game in general, which is the kind of end game and the victory conditions for these sort of games, whether it's like Total War or whether it's stuff like Stellaris or even stuff like Civ, I would say as well. So Total War has always had a problem with kind of your faction just snowballing in terms of power, so that the early game is always a lot of hard battles and a lot of difficult choices and really interesting stuff. But there's always some point you reach about sort of 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through a campaign where you own half the map, you're producing so much gold and so many units that it is just a matter of time before you defeat any other faction. Warhammer has tried to address that by having the Chaos Invasion as kind of like the end game. So, you know, they don't exist in the game for the first like 100 or 150 turns. And then at a certain point, depending on your difficulty, Chaos invades from the north. And, you know, so it doesn't matter whether Chaos, or it doesn't matter what has happened before that. They don't need Chaos to kind of still be in the game because they are just out of thin air. They are generated into your world. You know, it solves the problem of a player that is too powerful by that point because you just magic up a faction that is as strong as them. And so Chaos kind of comes down from the north, and they come down with quite a few armies, and the armies are particularly strong. Like they're sort of quite a unique combination of troops, and you have to really think about how to fight them, which is quite cool. You still sort of at some point, you know, if you know what you're doing, you can still defeat the Chaos Invasion. And so that helps a little bit with the Total War problem of getting too powerful. But the one thing that I was kind of getting at before is every faction's victory conditions kind of are quite similar, even though the factions themselves are quite different. So pretty much for everyone on the map, the way to win the game is to defeat a certain other faction. And so depending on who you are, it changes. So if you're dwarves, you got to defeat the orcs. If you're humans, you got to defeat the vampires. So defeat your kind of enemy faction and defeat the Chaos Invasion. That's what everyone sort of has to do. And I just find those victory conditions really unsatisfying, that the game kind of ends the same way no matter what faction you play. And like I said, I feel like this is a broader issue with these sort of games, that initially they're sandbox games and they encourage you to go in all different directions and make choices that take your faction or your empire in like drastically different paths to what the others are doing. But then at the end of the game, they still kind of try to squeeze everyone back into the same victory condition, if you know what I mean. And
yeah,
like it's a problem with Stellaris as well, I think, which we've talked about before, that, you know, you kind of get this huge amount of options in how your space empire develops, but at the end of the game, you still win it by just kind of, you know, beating up everyone else and things like that. And I don't know, it's a tough thing, I think, because I actually think the enjoyment in these games is not in winning them. And I almost feel like they shouldn't even have victory conditions, which I know for a lot of people that would be unsatisfying. But for me, like, it's almost about setting your own goals. And yeah, I don't know. I just kind of, I did get to a point in my campaign where I'm enjoying the game, but at some point I kind of look at the victory conditions and I'm like, all right, well, I guess I've got to capture these two factions and kill this one army. And, you know, I'm just kind of ticking off boxes and then the game's over. Then I've officially won, even though I've sort of like, I'm not really that invested at that point.
So what you want is Civilization 6 Warhammer Edition?
No, actually, because I think Civilization has the same problem. Because Civilization has 4 or 5 or 6 different victory conditions, but because every single civ has to be able to achieve them, none of the civs can be drastically different from one another. So civ almost has the same issue, but it results in a different problem. So you couldn't have drastically different factions because every faction still needs to be able to win a science victory or win a culture victory.
So Stellaris? Warhammer edition?
Well, look, I've thought about this a lot, and my two solutions are what I said before. You have no victory conditions. Like, the game stops when the player decides they have achieved their goals. But I understand that doesn't work for a lot of people. You know, people need goals. They need boxes to be ticked to feel, you know, that the game is done. My preference for something like Warhammer would be to, instead of having everyone have to defeat chaos, have a whole bunch of really little objectives in the game. So, you know, have something like that. It's, you kind of, I don't even know if you call them victory conditions, but say it's like, you know, one of your victories you can get is to reform the Empire, which is kind of something that you do in the Empire campaign. And then maybe another victory is to defeat the orcs. And to defeat the orcs, you have to kill these factions and hold these territories. And then maybe it's a completely different victory condition to defeat the Chaos Invasion. And I would rather see, rather than the game, everyone being funneled into beating Chaos at the end, I'd rather see the game have a variety of victory conditions. So you can say, all right, I'm going to play a game where my victory condition are, you know, conditions are this one and this one. And once I've achieved those, then I'll stop playing. Because, you know, they've been ticked off and I'll feel like I'm satisfied with this game. Whereas the way it is now, it's just like, you know, it's a fun game, but everyone finishes the game the same way. And I feel like it works against what the game is about, if that makes sense. It works against kind of the diversity.
Could you play it like that if you wanted to? Like, would you be satisfied ending it after you've done what you wanted to? Or is it not kind of diverse enough for you to just play it your way?
You could set those goals yourself and stop playing at any point. But I guess it's kind of, you know, it's always nice when the game kind of recognizes that, if you know what I mean. Like, you know, you can set your own goals in things, but it is nice when there's something in the game that maybe tracks your progress towards it. I guess it's that kind of, I don't know, it's that part of our brain that like being told we're doing well and rewarded in that sense.
You could maybe even have like a really small reward per thing that you achieve, you know, like it gives you a little upgrade or some
Exactly.
sort of incentive.
That's the way I see it. It's like each one would have a kind of unique reward, and, you know, you do as many as you feel like doing and then stop playing. But, you know, like I said, I think it's an issue that kind of plagues these sort of very large scale strategy games, and it almost kind of comes with the territory. So, you know, we'll see how it goes. But yeah, besides that though, I've been absolutely loving this one. Like I said, I kind of can't wait to try other factions in it. I'm a little bit torn about whether I should wait for Warhammer 2 to go on sale, and then I get that kind of big combined game. So yeah, I'm still kind of tossing up which one of those I'll go for. But yeah, I'm having a great time with Total War Warhammer.
Well, all right. As mentioned, we've kind of all played like one game each since the last episode, so we'll endeavor to get a little bit more in before the next one. But luckily, we have got some listener mail to answer this week to make up for our slackness. Now, I mentioned when I was talking about Rush earlier that friend of the show, Josh, got in touch with me about that game, and funnily enough, he's also sent in a email for us to answer. Now, Josh recently revealed to us that something went wrong with his podcast app, and he was unaware that we had released like our last 4 or 5 episodes and just thought we were on an extended hiatus. So true to form, he's listened to everything and immediately gotten back in touch, and this is what he has had to say. Hey crew, Timmy, with your new Xbox One X purchase, including Game Pass, I just realized you already have Halo Infinite pre-ordered. Seeing that it will be playable on the base model Xbox One, the One X should provide a pretty good version of the game. What are everyone's thoughts on Halo Infinite cross-compatibility, and how long do you think it will be supported on the Xbox One series? Thanks, Josh. Now, of course, what Josh is referring to there is Microsoft had their big their own version of E3, I suppose. And they revealed a whole bunch of games they've got coming up and some stuff about the Xbox Series X, etc., etc. And one of the big things out of that was Halo Infinite, which is, of course, the latest installment in the Xbox flagship title. Now, guys, from what I gather, I'm really the only one of the three of us that has played much Halo. Is that right?
Yeah, I played a little bit of 3 co-op. Like, I think you could do the campaign co-op. I maybe did the first couple of hours with my brother, and that was all. You know, Halo's a series I've always meant to play through the single player campaigns because it seems to be quite highly regarded as a kind of, you know, space opera like sci-fi story. You know, not necessarily anything kind of like hugely groundbreaking, but just something like really solid that people have good things to say about. And it's got a bunch of re-releases and remasters, so I've really got no excuse for not having played it, but I haven't. There you go.
Yeah, likewise, I completely missed the Halo train. You know, I played a bit of it multiplayer at, you know, one of our uncommon guest's house, Butter's house. Used to play that like multiplayer, the first one. But other than that, and maybe watching some Red versus Blue for some people out there who might remember that. I know really not a lot about the series whatsoever. But like Paul said, there's no excuse now that there's all these re-releases, and I'm sure it's not that expensive to really get your hands on a bunch of them. It's always been like something I've wanted to get into because I love the idea of Halo. Like, you know, the floating ring in space. I don't know what its name is. I guess that's the Halo. Um, um,
Yeah, it's
but
very
yeah,
Arthur C. Clarke, isn't it? Like you used to
yeah, it
you used to
is.
read those novels. What were they called? Rama?
Rama, yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's very it's got to be massively influenced by that kind of
I
thing.
think the Halo idea is like it's straight out of like Ringworld by Larry Niven. It's like that whole idea of like the kind of like civilization on a ring like that. Mass Effect has a similar thing with like the Citadel. It's almost like
Yes,
a semicircle ring that people live on
yeah.
in the same way. Yeah.
I think the Citadel is probably closer to Rama, and like you said, Ringworld
Yeah.
is more
Yeah.
closer to Halo. But yeah, again, I need to get into it, so I'm probably not very well equipped to be able to answer any part of this question, but I'll chime in if I feel I need to. But
Well, look,
Timmy, I
I
guess
have
what are your thoughts?
yeah. So I played 1 to 3 and then ODST, and I thought 1 to 3 were like excellent. I really couldn't tell you how they've held up at all. Um, you know, I think they were, you know, the regard they got at the time was definitely earned. I think if you went back, there would be like a distinct lack of character involved. Like
Mm.
the Master Chief is kind of like your Gordon Freeman to some extent,
Yeah,
like
your silent protagonist.
voiceless kind of. You don't get a lot of a feel for. He's just like a super soldier. He's just the best, you know. Um, but yeah, like I really liked a lot of the stuff in that game. Like, you know, it asks the question who the real villain is in that first game, which I thought was really cool. You know, a lot of the stuff that makes Destiny quite good, Bungie have refined from what they did in those first few Halo games, I think.
Right.
And it's funny that, you know, I mentioned that because Halo Infinite looks like, you know, 343 Industries are applying the Destiny always on, always online gameplay model to the Halo world with Halo Infinite. And I'm really not sure how I feel about that. I really enjoyed playing the campaigns of Halo 1 to 3, and I really liked playing them in co-op. I thought they lent themselves to that really nicely from Halo 2 onwards. And I spent so many hours playing Halo 1 and 2 local multiplayer. Like when I was in my high school bands, we spent as long playing that game as we did like actually practicing playing music. So like it was just such a good time sink, and I have such fond memories. But I did get burnt out on the series like real easily. Like I never played Reach, and I never played like the strategy game, and I kind of haven't gone back for anything since ODST. I can't even tell you how many there are. I'm sure there was like a 4 and a 5 that I
Yeah, I
haven't.
feel like Infinite is 6, technically,
Yeah,
something like
yeah.
that.
But yeah, it's interesting. The trailer for Halo Infinite has it kicks off with somebody who looks like they're kind of stranded on a spaceship, and then they just happen across the Master Chief floating in stasis in space, or like he's just in his suit. So I don't know if he's in stasis or he's just floating wide awake, whatever. I didn't watch enough of it, but I the end of 3, I'm pretty sure he sacrifices himself and he's just like flung out into space. So for me, I'm like, cool. I am just going to headcanon anything in between 3 and this straight out, and that absolutely works for me. Yeah, I'm glad. Just going back to Josh's question, I don't really have many opinions about the cross-platform compatibility because I don't really play online multiplayer and I don't really enjoy it, and I wouldn't be playing Halo Infinite for that. I guess if it's a Destiny kind of thing, though, there's going to be a lot of squatting up and co-op to some extent. Like I also don't do the PvP in Destiny, so same deal. But so the playing with someone on a superior console or PC probably isn't going to affect me too much, I wouldn't imagine. And I don't really have any plans on getting the Xbox Series X, so I'm glad this is coming out on that, and I'll get it for free. I guess my biggest takeaway is that with Game Pass, Microsoft are really leaning into that, and they are giving their flagship series and their first new game in that series in years. And, what you could argue is the leading release for their brand new console, essentially for free. Like if you've paid like however much it costs, like $80 or whatever for a year subscription to Game Pass, or you got it on some sort of deal like I did through my telco, getting that game feels like I'm not paying anything for it, and it's like their big release, that they're hanging the new console on. That's huge, and that really surprised me.
I guess looking at Josh's question here and his question about how long do you think it will be supported on the Xbox One, like my kind of pragmatic, cynical answer to that is like as long as people are playing Xbox Ones, which I know is kind of like a cop-out answer, but I feel like, in the sense that as soon as it doesn't like make financial sense, that's when it will stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I don't even think that's cynical, like I just think that's business, right? Like,
yeah,
as long as they're still making money off of it. So I would say you're going to at least get it until like the first big DLC, like, how Destiny normally goes base game, then 1 and 2 little things, and then something like Forsaken. You'd at least get it for that long, I reckon. You get a year or 2, year and a half at least.
Well, didn't the original Xbox's live service only just get cut off recently? Because I think when we're talking about support, in terms of Xbox, we're really talking about the support for whatever online live service is there, regardless of what actual console you're playing it on. Now, the Xbox 360 live service is still going strong, and that still is supported. So I would imagine that it would probably be, I'd say, much longer than 1 or 2 years.
I think
it depends what we mean by supported, I suppose. Like,
Yeah.
are they going to keep ensuring that new content is playable on an older controller map? Like, do they bother doing that?
Yeah, or older hardware.
Yeah, is there any need? Like, do they have anything they need to do at a server level to allow both consoles to play? Like, what is their work commitment? If it's not much at all, I don't see why they wouldn't just keep it going. People are paying to stay online, and that's the console they've got. Well, that's still money in their pocket. It depends.
I suppose
how much work is required
with the Game Pass model. If it's subscription based, in the end, it's like it doesn't matter for them which console you're on. In that sense. Whereas previously, it may have been like, well, having people on the latest console is more important because you sell them the game there. If they get all your games through the subscription service anyway, as long as you're subscribed, then it's irrelevant kind of where you're playing. If you know what I mean. So like maybe the support will go on like significantly longer. Maybe it will kind of go through the entire generation. Xbox One will get, probably in some ways a little bit of a stripped back level of support, because it obviously can't be exactly the same because the hardware's different. But yeah, maybe for them it doesn't matter in that sense on this kind of financial model.
I think also the Xbox One is a very capable system as well. So even coming down to the hardware, the scalability may be a very easy thing for them to do, even if it's got this updated engine. It might be very easily scaled back so it does continue to get supported on Xbox One. Um, but I guess on the other hand, it could easily go down the route of something like GTA Online, which is where you've essentially got two services. You've got the previous generation's online service, and then you've got the current generation's online service. Even though there's the same game, they're essentially two different services because the old generation can't handle what, like the first person, like higher definition graphics that the new version of GTA has on. So it could easily be that as well. But I'm more inclined to think that it's going to be what we were just mentioning in terms of it being something that can transcend the generation.
Yeah, I guess in terms of scalability, like a lot of people talk about how the current and next gen of consoles are closer to just PCs than they have ever been before. And so I guess in that sense, it is easier to scale, like making a game that will run on this generation and the Xbox Series X is not the generational leap that it used to be, because you're basically talking about two different PCs with different specs. And in terms of the kind of the base operating systems that are running those things, that's what they are at this point. Like, yeah. They're just different PCs. They used to be more kind of bespoke hardware, so it was more difficult to cross things over cross-platform and to bring things over generationally, but it's just not like that now. So yeah, maybe that's a positive, they can have more continuity between the two.
Yeah, I think that's something that's becoming more and more apparent with each new console release, and the fact that between them you get like the deluxe version of those, or like the S version or the X version or the Plus or the Pro. Like there's just not as big a difference between consoles anymore, and it's just because as things get better and better looking, there's only so much better it can get, right? We can only make human faces look more like human faces, like it's not going from square pixels to nice rounded things anymore. So yeah, I think we kind of answered that question, maybe. I don't know. Thanks anyway for sending it in, Josh. And if anyone else has any questions they want to send in, or you want to, give us your input on that question itself, you can get in touch with us via email at discanddice@gmail.com. And also we're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all those good places, so you can get in touch with us. Just search Disc and Dice on any of those platforms. Or if you're listening to this on YouTube, chuck us a comment. But guys, I think we need to commit to putting a little bit more effort for the sake of the podcast. So what are you going to play between now and the next episode?
Well, I didn't talk about this episode, but I finished the third season and started the final season of the Telltale Walking Dead games. I kind of wanted to hold off until I just finished them before we chatted about it again. So before next episode, I hope to have that one done. Besides that, I'm hoping to also finish off Marvel's Spider-Man, because I lent my PS4 to a friend so he could play Last of Us 2. He's now finished it, and so I can get my PS4 back, and I can get back into that one. So I'm hoping to have those two knocked out by next episode, so we can have a little bit of a chat about that. I know we've talked about Spider-Man quite a bit already on previous episodes, but I think Timmy's always interested to discuss that one again.
I will always talk about Spider-Man. Doesn't even have to be the game, man. Let's just talk about Spider-Man.
Yeah, and also we're announcing our spin-off podcast.
Cannot wait. Like every episode, I'm just like holding back useless comic knowledge. But yeah, bring it on. What about you, JT?
Well, I'm really interested, by the way, Paul, just to hear what happens in the Walking Dead series for you, because I am genuinely into just how that game plays out for different people. So really interested to hear about that. But as for me, I have finally finished the download for Doom 2016. It was like a whopping like 65 gigabytes or something. It was huge.
So I like that was I finished the download. It was like you haven't finished the game, but you're like, I've really been working on this for a couple of weeks now, and I finished the download.
Yeah, I can tell you that download, man. My palms are sweaty. Um, no, I'll be getting headfirst into that, and so by next pod, I think I'll definitely have that finished. So really keen to finally get back into my Doom series playthrough. So that's what you can look forward to from me. And Timmy, what about you?
Well, look, I've been absolutely dragging my feet with The Last of Us Part 2, so I am just working as hard as I can to finish that, and I've got blinders on. I won't play anything else apart from Disney Rush with the boys, but I won't play any other things for myself until I've got that one licked. Of course, I might get some Pokemon card games in if Shayla's keen or something like that. But we'll see. It's The Last of Us Part 2 is my main squeeze.
I fully support you focusing on Last of Us 2.
I'm
starting to forget what happened in that game.
Oh dear.
Hey Timmy, you know what? Don't feel too bad, because even though I'm not playing the game and I know we're planning on doing a bit of a special about it, I am still slugging out watching the Brad play through his. So I think I've still probably I don't know. I think I've probably still got the better part of like a third of the game left. So
Oh wow. Okay.
yeah, we're in the same boat.
Yeah, cool. Alrighty. Well, that's about it, I reckon. We managed to spin out not playing a whole lot to a regular length episode, which I think is pretty good. Normally I'd talk about all the places you can get in touch with us, but I just did that thanks to Josh's letter. So we are just about all wrapped up, but thanks everybody for listening. Feel free to get in touch if you've got something you want to hear about specifically next episode. But if not, you will hear from us in a fortnight.